A sickening crack tore through the narrow street like a gunshot as the young black teen's arm broke clean at the elbow. His scream was sharp and immediate, filled with a kind of pain that made even the sky seem to hold its breath. He collapsed onto the concrete, his face twisted, his good hand clutching the ruined arm that now hung useless at his side. One of the two black belt thugs stood above him, massive and unbothered, smirking like he'd just stepped out of a training montage rather than a real street. "That's what happens when you say no," he growled, his voice echoing off the brick walls, loud enough for every door and window on the block to catch it. "Anybody else feeling brave today?" The teen was just 17, black, thin, proud, the kind of kid who didn't have anyone left to fight for him but still refused to bend. No father, no older brother. Just a tiny corner store he ran with his grandmother's help, and a spine stronger than most grown men who'd never known loss. He didn't yell. He didn't plead. He had simply looked them in the eye and said, "No." And now he was paying the price. The thug who broke his arm wasn't just some fool swinging wild. He was trained, a black belt, a predator with years of sparring under his belt and a warped idea of justice. He and his partner had turned martial arts into extortion, and fear was their favorite currency. His GI jacket fluttered in the summer wind like a flag, the black belt around his waist tight and proud, like it was a badge of domination. The crowd didn't move. Vendors froze at their carts. Customers inside the deli across the street pretended not to hear. A few cell phones were up, trembling hands pressing record, but not a single foot stepped forward, except for one man. Sylvester Stallone had been leaning quietly across the street, just outside a boarded-up repair shop. Hood up, cap pulled low. At first glance, he looked like any other old-timer trying to stay warm on a humid Philly afternoon. But his eyes never left the boy. His jaw clenched, his fists closed, his breathing deepened, not out of fear, but focus. And then, as the thug kicked the boy again, driving his heel into the teen's ribs like he wasn't even human, Sly's body moved on instinct. No pause, no plan, just purpose. He stepped off the sidewalk, every step slow and steady, like a man who knew exactly how far he was willing to go. The thug turned, confused, almost amused. "You want some too, Grandpa?" he scoffed. Sly didn't answer. He stopped next to the boy, eyes locked on the thug, unblinking. And then, with a single motion, he shrugged off his hoodie and let it drop to the pavement. The street went quiet. The crowd forgot to breathe. Phones stopped shaking. And for the first time all day, the thug's smirk cracked ever so slightly. Before we continue, like and subscribe to watch Sylvester Stallone's epic face-off with two black belt thugs who broke a black teen's arm in broad daylight. And in the comments, tell us, where are you watching from? It was a heavy Wednesday in South Philadelphia, the kind where the heat clings to your skin, even in the shade, and the air smells faintly of exhaust, fried onions, and old brick. Along Tasker Street, past a shuttered barber shop and a cracked mural of Dr. King, sat a small bodega that had been there since before anyone could remember. It was worn but dependable, the kind of place where old ladies bought scratch-offs and teenagers picked up blue raspberry Slurpees after school. Behind the counter stood Malik, a 16-year-old black kid with sharp eyes and a steady gaze. His frame was lean from long days and skipped meals, but his posture was upright, firm, like a boy trying hard to become the man he never got to learn from. His father had died serving in the Gulf, and his mother disappeared into addiction when he was still in grade school. Malik lived with his grandmother, Miss Laverne, in a row house with 3 locks on the door and a prayer by every window. He worked the store after school every weekend and all summer long. He was quiet, respectful, and he always remembered your name, your brand of cigarettes, and whether your kid had made the honor roll last semester. Folks in the neighborhood trusted him, even admired him. But admiration doesn't always translate to action when trouble walks in the door. That day, Trouble wore a pair of frayed black GI jackets and swaggered in with the kind of arrogance that only came from knowing no one would stop you. Tommy and Rich were their names, though everyone called them the Karate Boys. They were in their early 30s, both white, both built like refrigerators with fists, and both proudly wore their black belts like a warning sign. Former martial arts competitors, regional champions in some forgotten Midwest dojo, now running a protection racket across South Philly. Store owners either paid up or faced incidents. Most paid. No one wanted broken windows or broken ribs. No one except Malik. He had refused, twice, and not with defiance, but with dignity. "I'm sorry," he had said the week before, "but I don't pay to be scared." Now Tommy was tapping the glass jars on the shelf like they were piano keys, while Rich leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, chewing on a toothpick. "Kid," Tommy said, his voice syrupy sweet, "we've been real patient, but your attitude is bad for business." Malik didn't flinch. "I'm not paying you. My father didn't pay for fear, and neither will I." Tommy tilted his head, smiling, but his eyes were cold. "Your daddy ain't around, is he?" he said, stepping around the counter. "That's the difference between pride and stupidity, boy." The last word hung in the air, thick and deliberate. Malik stiffened, his hands shaking slightly beneath the counter, but he didn't step back. "This shop's all I've got," he said. "You're not taking it." Tommy's hand moved fast, a loud slap, hard and sudden. Malik stumbled into the shelf behind him, knocking over jars of peanut butter and plastic bottles of soda. Before he could recover, Tommy grabbed him by the shirt and hurled him to the floor like he was tossing out trash. Malik landed hard on his left arm, and the crack that followed was sharp and sickening. He screamed, clutching the elbow that now bent in a direction no arm ever should. Tommy stood over him, chest rising, jaw clenched. "You people," he muttered, not even trying to hide the venom in his tone. "Always so damn mouthy until someone makes you bleed." Outside, a small crowd began to form. An old man sitting on a milk crate across the street put down his newspaper. A mother paused mid-step, holding her child a little closer. A couple of teenagers pulled out their phones, fingers trembling on the screen, but no one moved. This was South Philly, where silence often felt safer than justice. And yet, just a few feet away, under the shade of a laundromat awning, a man was watching. He looked older, grayer, maybe 70. He wore a hoodie, faded jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low. His hands were in his pockets, and a cane rested loosely against his leg. Most people saw him and saw no one. But beneath the quiet stillness, behind the lined face and steady breath, was someone who had once gone the full 15 rounds with the world. His name was Sylvester Stallone. He hadn't meant to get involved. He'd come back to South Philly for a funeral. His cousin Joey had lost a long fight with cancer. Sly hadn't walked these streets in years. He kept his visits low, private. No cameras, no fanfare. But when he heard that bone snap, when he saw that boy writhing in pain, Something in him stirred. Not from ego, not from nostalgia, but from instinct. Without a word, he stepped off the curb and crossed the street. Rich saw him first. "Can we help you, Grandpa?" He smirked. Sly said nothing. He walked past him, past the shattered display shelf and the blood on the linoleum, and knelt beside Malik. "You still breathing, kid?" he asked, his voice low, raspy like a gravel road at dawn. Malik nodded barely. "I didn't back down," he whispered through clenched teeth. "Damn right," Sly said, and then he stood up. Tommy was already laughing. "Wait a damn minute," he said. Are you actually... Holy crap. Is that Rocky Balboa?" Sly took off his hoodie. Beneath it, his arms still carried the thick muscle of a man who'd fought wars with time, not just fists. "I played a fighter for 40 years, he said calmly, "but that was just a movie. Today, I'm just me." Tommy stepped forward, eyes glinting. "What, you want to be a hero? You gonna pull some slow-motion movie punch and save the day?" Sly tilted his head. "No speeches, just a question." "What?" Tommy sneered. "Which one of you wants to go down first?" The store fell silent. Outside, more people gathered. Phones came up. Someone whispered, "That's him. That's really him." Tommy launched the first punch, a quick jab meant to shut things down. Sly shifted, just enough for it to miss, and countered with nothing. He wasn't fighting yet. He was reading. Tommy came again, 2 quick jabs, then a sharp kick. Sly blocked with his forearm and stepped back. Still no swing, still watching. Tommy growled, his breath getting shorter, his pride beginning to flare. He lunged again, this time with a right hook. And then it came. Sly pivoted. His back foot turned, his shoulder dropped just enough, and he let it fly. A punch. Not big, not loud, but perfect, compact, explosive, and devastating. The same motion he'd rehearsed for decades on film sets and heavy bags. The Rocky punch. It landed square on Tommy's jaw, a shockwave of muscle and memory, and the man dropped like a marionette whose strings had just been cut. Cereal flew everywhere. The shelf groaned beneath the weight of the fall. Rich froze. Sly turned to him, breathing steady, eyes calm. "You gonna be smart, or be next?" And outside, on that cracked South Philly street, the wind shifted. Tommy stepped forward first, still half grinning, but now with a nervous twitch at the edge of his mouth. Maybe it was the way Stallone stood. Feet grounded, weight balanced, hands open but ready. Or maybe it was that 1,000-yard stare that said he'd been through more rounds than this clown could count. "You serious, old man?" Tommy said, voice cracking ever so slightly. "You know who we are?" Stallone tilted his head, just enough to acknowledge him, then shifted his eyes to Rich, who was circling slowly to the left. "I know exactly who you are. You're bullies in black belts. You picked the wrong kid. And now, you've got me." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His presence was the volume. Tommy snorted. "You think this is a movie? You gonna throw a punch and everyone claps?" Sly's mouth didn't even twitch. "No applause necessary. Just here to remind you. Some things don't get filmed. They get felt." That seemed to confuse the thug more than it threatened him, and confusion turned into rage. Tommy lunged forward with a fast jab meant to catch the old man off guard. But Sly slipped it with a shoulder roll, barely moving his feet, and let the punch slide past his cheek. A half-second later, Rich came in from the side with a spinning heel kick that sliced through the air with practiced power, but Sly had already shifted his stance. He stepped just enough to let the kick pass him harmlessly, and as Rich landed awkwardly, Sly tapped his shoulder lightly with the back of his hand like he was marking a target. The thugs exchanged a quick glance, and you could almost see the confidence leak out of them. They'd expected a struggle, maybe even a takedown. What they got instead was something surgical, silent, and ancient. An echo of real fighters who didn't need noise to make a point. Tommy roared and came in again, this time throwing a combination: left, right, hook, elbow, all solid, all fast, and all missing by inches. Stallone wasn't dancing. He wasn't flashy. He just moved the way water moves, finding space between the blows, slipping around violence like it was predictable. He hadn't thrown a single punch, but already the momentum had shifted. The crowd could feel it. People stepped closer. A man in a white apron from the cheesesteak shop leaned out the doorway. A grandmother gripping her grocery cart moved slowly toward the curb. Malik, still curled on the ground, his face pale and slick with sweat, looked up through blurred eyes and saw something he would never forget. The same man he'd once seen on his old TV screen, back when his dad was still alive, now standing over him, not as a legend, not as an actor, but as a wall between him and the people who wanted to break him. Tommy, breathing heavy now, shoved forward with a knee aimed at Sly's stomach. It connected, solid, fast, and Stallone took a step back. His breath caught. That one landed. The crowd gasped. Rich used the moment to lunge forward with a flying elbow, which clipped the side of Sly's head. He stumbled, shoulder hitting the metal shutter of the corner store. For a brief second, he bent at the waist, coughed, and wiped blood from the edge of his mouth. Rich stepped back, bouncing on his heels, cocky again. "Not so tough now, huh, Grandpa?" he taunted. Sly straightened slowly, rolling his shoulders, adjusting his stance. He didn't answer, just breathed. One beat, two, then three words, low and steady. "Now you're mine." His hands came up, not high, not flashy, just enough. His eyes narrowed, and then it happened. Rich swung again, a sloppy jab thrown with too much speed and not enough aim. Sly slipped it and answered with his first punch of the fight. A compact right hand that landed clean on Rich's ribs, right under the armpit. Not loud, but you heard the air leave his lungs. He staggered. Tommy stepped in to recover the moment, throwing another jab, this one wild, unfocused. Sly ducked it and countered with a snapping elbow straight to Tommy's chest. The sound was dull and sickening. Tommy backed off, winded. Now Stallone pressed forward, not fast, not rushing, just inevitable. Rich tried to recover, throwing a high kick aimed at Sly's temple. He blocked it with his forearm and drove his heel into Rich's supporting leg, knocking him sideways. As Rich stumbled, Sly grabbed the back of his jacket and sent him flying into the iron railing near the stoop. The thud made a few people flinch. One woman dropped her shopping bag. The fight was no longer a spectacle. It was a reckoning. Tommy looked around, realizing they were losing the crowd. Not just physically, but morally. The fear was gone, replaced with awe, with hope. He grunted and launched one more desperate attack, a spinning back fist meant to end it. Sly ducked low, came up inside his reach, and delivered the punch. The punch. The one he'd trained for in silence, delivered thousands of times on sets and in rings, but never like this. It came from the floor, through his hips, up his spine, and out through his right fist. It wasn't theatrical. It was perfect. The Rocky punch. It landed square on Tommy's jaw, twisting his face, lifting him off his feet for half a second before his body slammed backward onto the pavement. He didn't move, not even a twitch. Rich, on his knees by the curb, stared, stunned. Sly turned his gaze toward him, gave a slow, deliberate shake of the head, and that was enough. Rich held up his hands and stayed down. The street fell into stillness, the kind that only comes after a storm. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. Something deeper was happening. An understanding that justice had just been delivered without a siren, without a badge, without anyone needing to say a word. Malik looked up again, tears welling in his eyes, not from pain, but from something closer to gratitude. From knowing that for once, someone had stood up when it counted. Sly stepped over to him, knelt down, and gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You did good, kid. You stayed standing, even when they tried to break you." Malek choked out a whisper. "Thank you, sir." Stallone gave a faint smile. "No need to thank me. I just remembered who I used to be." He stood and turned to the crowd, now parted like the Red Sea, and called out, "Someone get this kid to a hospital. He needs help." A man with a delivery van parked at the corner nodded, rushed forward, and opened the passenger side. Sly helped lift Malik carefully, cradling the broken arm, and eased him into the seat. The boy winced, but didn't cry. His eyes never left Sly. "What's your name?" he asked. Sly looked at him, then at the street, then back again. "I'm just someone who still believes in throwing a punch for the right reason." He closed the door, tapped the roof, and the van drove off slowly, making its way toward Mercy Hospital, just a few blocks west. The people on the street didn't say much. They didn't have to. Some nodded. Some placed hands over hearts. Others simply stood still, holding on to the moment. Because for once, someone fought back. Not out of pride, not for show, but because it was right. And in South Philly, that kind of fight was worth remembering. As the van carrying Malik turned the corner and faded into the hum of South Philly traffic, Stallone stood still, his chest rising and falling with the quiet rhythm of a man who hadn't thrown a punch like that in years, but hadn't forgotten how. His knuckles ached. His ribs throbbed where the knee had landed. There was blood in his mouth, not much, just enough to taste the past. He wiped it with the back of his hand and looked around. The street had transformed. It wasn't fear anymore that filled the air. It was something closer to reverence. People stepped out from behind parked cars, from stoops, from doorways where they'd been watching, waiting, hoping someone else would go first. An older woman with silver-streaked dreadlocks walked slowly up to him. Her eyes glistened behind gold-rimmed glasses. She pressed her hand to her chest and whispered, "We've waited a long time for someone like you." Sly met her gaze, nodded once, and said, "It shouldn't take someone like me. It should have never come to this, but it had, and they both knew it." Tommy still lay motionless by the crushed cereal shelf, groaning softly now, a man stripped of dominance. Rich sat slumped by the stoop, head between his knees, sweat pouring from his face. Neither of them looked dangerous anymore. Just small. Sly didn't even glance their way again. He knew the moment had passed, and it didn't belong to them anymore. It belonged to the boy with the broken arm, to the people who stood and watched, and to every time someone had stayed silent because standing up was too risky. As he retrieved his hoodie from the sidewalk, dusting it off with one steady swipe, a teenager holding a phone approached. His voice shook slightly, part nerves, part excitement. "Sir, that was, can I ask, are you really him?" Sly looked at the kid, at the screen still recording, then gently shook his head. "You already got what matters," he said. The boy lowered the phone, as if embarrassed, and quietly said, "Thanks for doing something." Stallone slipped the hoodie back over his shoulders. His steps were slower now, not from weakness but from the weight of what had happened. As he moved down the block, the crowd parted, not because he demanded it, but because something in him told them this wasn't the time to ask for photos or praise. It was a time to reflect. He passed the old laundromat, the flickering open sign above the window still buzzing faintly. An old man with a Vietnam vet hat gave a subtle salute. Sly returned it with a nod. 2 blocks down, just past the Catholic church, where he'd once been an altar boy, he turned into an alley and leaned back against the brick wall. He closed his eyes, let the air move around him. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind the familiar burn in his shoulders, the dull ache in his lower back, and the echo of the crowd's silence still pulsing in his ears. He thought about Joey, his cousin who used to sneak him cannolis from the bakery when they were kids. He thought about all the fights he'd staged, choreographed, rehearsed for camera angles, and he thought about how none of it had felt as real as this afternoon in the heat and grit of South Philly, standing up for a kid with nobody else. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from his driver. "Need me to pick you up?" He stared at the message for a moment before typing back, "Not yet. Gonna walk." He needed the steps, needed the time. He passed a boarded-up storefront with spray-painted words, "No justice, no peace." Underneath, someone had scribbled in marker, "But sometimes justice has fists." He couldn't help but smile at that. He turned onto Mifflin Street, where he saw 2 young boys playing basketball with a busted rim tied to a street sign. One of them looked up, did a double take, then nudged the other. "Yo, that's him," the second boy whispered. Sly gave them a nod, a tired smile, and kept walking. One of the boys called out, "Hey, mister, you hit like Rocky." He didn't turn around. He just raised his fist in the air, slow and steady, and kept going. That was enough. Back near the corner store, a small group had gathered around Malik's shop. Someone had picked up the spilled change. Another man, Jorge, who ran the tire shop on 9th, was boarding up the broken window. "Kid's tough," he said to no one in particular. "Tougher than half of us." Inside the store, Miss Laverne had arrived, called by a neighbor. Her voice broke as she picked up her grandson's backpack from behind the counter. "He didn't do anything wrong," she said softly. "He just said no." And that was it. That was all it took to draw blood. By nightfall, the story had already spread. People who hadn't even been there told it like they had. Every detail sharpened, every moment stretched. He moved like a shadow. Took down both of them without saying a word. It was the punch. The punch. Looked like something out of the movies. But the difference was, this time, it wasn't make-believe. This time, nobody yelled, "Cut!" Nobody handed him a trophy. There was no music swelling in the background. Just sweat, asphalt, and truth. A video made its way to social media. Not flashy, not edited, just shaky footage from someone's iPhone showing a man in a gray hoodie dropping one of the city's most feared enforcers with a punch that had no theatrics, only purpose. Comments flooded in. "Who is this guy?" "South Philly legend." That's real courage. That's what standing up looks like. But Stallone didn't know. He didn't check the comments. He didn't watch the video. He didn't need to. He spent the night in a modest hotel room, window cracked open to let in the city's sounds. Sirens in the distance. A dog barking 3 streets over. Laughter from a nearby apartment. He laid on the bed hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling. He felt every bone in his body, but inside, he felt peace. Not glory, not pride, just peace. The next morning, he walked back to the corner. The store was closed, but a sign had been taped to the door. It read, "Back soon. We don't quit." Beneath it, someone had added in Sharpie, "Thanks to the man who didn't either." Stallone stood there for a long moment, hands in his pockets, taking it all in. The scar on his eyebrow itched a little. His right shoulder popped when he shifted weight. But he felt something good in his chest, something real. As he turned to leave, a man across the street raised a cup of coffee in salute. "You gave us something yesterday," he called out. "Not just a fight, a reminder." Stallone smiled and replied, "I just threw a punch. You folks are the ones who made it count." He turned the corner and walked into the sunlight. No applause, no closing credits, just footsteps. The kind that echo long after the fighter is gone.